C41. Also, now go and make a big cake. You must choose the best ingredients. Jik Xiao Han didn't know what his precious daughter would like to eat, but he felt that all girls would like something like a cake. Sure enough, the essence of Tang Xiaonei's glutton was triggered, and she immediately cheered, "Yay, Daddy wants to prepare the big cake. Can I eat it?" "Mummy, I want to eat cake. I want to eat fried chicken leg, ice cream, and Tang Xiaonei was unable to remember so many things at the moment. Furthermore, whatever she wanted to eat, Tang Yuyu had forbidden her to eat. "Daddy, hug." Tang Xiaonei immediately opened her short hands and asked Jik Xiao Han to hug her. Tang Yuyu rolled her eyes. "This little heartless, with milk she's still a mother. With money she's already a father, right?" Jik Xiao Han immediately took the opportunity to hug her daughter in his embrace, and couldn't help but kiss her cute little face. Heavens, this was his daughter. He had never thought about what his child would look like, but at this moment, that soft and silky little fellow was lying on his shoulder as it sobbed softly, feeling wronged. Jik Xiao Han truly felt that his heart was being nurtured. He subconsciously tightened his grip. His daughter's small body was so light that it seemed like she had no weight. Her two short hands were tightly wrapped around his neck, unwilling to let go. Tang Yuyu originally wanted to slap his daughter's face to make her disobedient. But, at that moment, Tang Yuyu was suddenly unable to do anything. She had never seen her daughter hug a man so confidently. In the past, when she had male friends by her side, she would be on her guard and on guard, but she had never been so at ease while relying on a man. And this man, it was her father's. Tang Yuyu was truly angry and sad. But her daughter's look of being on guard made her heart extremely sad. It was as if her most treasured object was suddenly going to be stolen away by someone. She could do nothing about it. This feeling was extremely boring, and Tang Yuyu suddenly hated this kind of emotion. She should have immediately taken her daughter back from this man. Moreover, she should have taken her and her son away from here and not let this man have any contact with them. However, she suddenly didn't have the courage to snatch her daughter from his arms. Looking at her daughter's short hands that were tightly hugging Jik Xiao Han's neck and her small face that was pressed against his broad and thick shoulder, she felt as if something had scratched her heart at this moment. She suddenly turned around and headed towards walk outside. Jik Xiao Han proudly looked at the back of the stubborn leaving figure. C42. "Your mummy will beat me up." Tang Xiaonei, who was lying on Jik Xiao Han's shoulder, suddenly raised her head when she heard Mummy's footsteps, and sat upright. Immediately, she pouted and cried, "Mummy, where are you going?" Tang Xiaonei blinked her large eyes, raised her head and looked at the big father, and then looked at the mummy that had disappeared outside the door. "Xiaonei, your mummy has gone to the washroom. Your daddy will accompany you to play. Okay? What do you want to play?" Jik Xiao Han immediately seized the opportunity to get her daughter's favor. "Daddy, why don't you accompany Mummy to pee? I feel that she might have found a secret." An innocent little fellow still didn't know what it meant to be different between males and females. She only felt that if other people's fathers were like this, her father and Mummy would definitely be able to do the same. When the Uncle Yuan heard this, he could not help but let out a laugh. Jik Xiao Han's handsome face was also flushed red by his daughter's embarrassment. That, Xiaonei, I'm afraid your mummy will beat me up." Jik Xiao Han really didn't know whether to laugh or cry. With such a cute treasure, his future life should not be boring anymore. "Mummy is nice, I promise she won't hit you. I saw her run out just now. It's so big here. She really knows how to walk." What she was most worried about right now was that the mummy wanted to find the way there. If she couldn't find the restroom, what should she do? "Alright, I'll go lead the way for her." "Can you play drawing with Uncle Yuan?" Jik Xiao Han really couldn't bear to reject his daughter's request. Although this request was extremely absurd, let's hurry up and take a look. Of course, it was impossible for him to actually go to the bathroom to look for Tang Yuyu. "Yes, Daddy, hurry up and go." Tang Xiaonei was immediately happy. Jik Xiao Han stood up and walked out of the hall with big strides. He first looked around. He did not see Tang Yuyu's figure and frowned. Where did this woman go? "Aren't we going to the bathroom?" Did he not find the washroom and just casually pee? Of course, Jik Xiao Han believed that Tang Yuyu was not such a person. Thus, he took large strides and walked out of the villa's entrance. From afar, he saw a frail and delicate figure. Alone, she stood at the edge of the beach, looking down at the swirling waves. What is she doing? Jik Xiao Han was really unable to understand why this woman would do such a strange thing. Just a moment ago, she was pretending that she was going to snatch his daughter back, but now, she actually ran over to his beach to watch the waves. Could it be that this woman was also attracted by his strong family background? What are you doing? Tang Yuyu, who was feeling hurt and wronged, suddenly heard the man's indifferent voice from behind him. She froze. The tears and snot on her face were too late to be wiped away. However, she didn't want this man to see her crying pitifully. In a moment of desperation, she immediately kicked off her shoes and quickly ran forward a few steps before diving into the sea. Are you crazy? Jik Xiao Han was really shocked by her actions. Right after that, he quickly ran over and tried to pull her back. C-43. I hate this man. Tang Yuyu was obviously not seeking death. She just wanted to borrow the seawater to wash her snot and tears. Even if her eyes were red and swollen for a moment, she could still say that it was caused by the sand, and she believed that the man wouldn't suspect her. Jik Xiao Han obviously didn't want to touch her either. Hearing her angry shout, he immediately let go. The wet clothes were now covered in sand. She was so angry that she wanted to throw a tantrum. This bastard must have done it on purpose. Jik Xiao Han narrowed his eyes, as he stared at her little face that was swollen red with anger, and sneered, "Looks like your legs are truly numb, wasting my time." Jik Xiao Han, you are a complete and utter bandit. You want to steal my most precious child? Tang Yuyu roared loudly from behind him. Only, a part of her voice had been covered by the sound of the ocean waves. Only Jik Xiao Han could hear her, and it couldn't travel any further. Jik Xiao Han suddenly stopped. After that, he slowly turned around, with a complex look in his eyes. It was you who stole my seed first. I am only taking them back now. You bastard. Tang Yuyu held onto his forehead and began to cry. Who wants to steal your seed? You were the one, obviously. I was drugged that day. You can totally reject me. But you didn't. Didn't you take the initiative to come over? From what Jik Xiao Han knew, this woman was also suspected of being the one to take the initiative in what happened that day. I'm not. I was unconscious that day. How could I take the initiative? If I had been awake, I would have killed you. Tang Yuyu became even angrier, grabbed a handful of sand and threw it towards him. Unfortunately, the distance was too far. She couldn't throw it at him, so it only served to increase her frustration. Who would believe your words? Jik Xiao Han thought that she was lying. Wasn't women the best at lying? Tang Yuyu sat on the beach like a wooden chicken as if she was struck by lightning. She suddenly felt that she hated this man for her entire life. Tang Yuyu rolled all over the sand as she sat by the seaside and stared blankly for a long time. When she thought about how her child would be mercilessly snatched away by a man, her tears continuously dripped. When she had finished crying and was thinking of finding the child, she went back to the living room of the beach house. The moment he stepped into the hall, he saw a tall man walking back and forth in the living room. There was a little girl lying in his arms. The little guy's long hair was in disarray, and his cute little face had fallen asleep, with one of his little fingers in his little mouth. Tang Yuyu was stunned. Her daughter did indeed have the habit of sucking her fingers when she was sleeping, but she had never heard of it before. How did she fall asleep peacefully in the arms of this bastard? Jik Xiao Han had been focusing on coaxing his daughter to sleep the entire time. Not long after his daughter fell asleep, his gaze shifted towards the door. He gave a signal to Uncle Yuan, who immediately walked in front of Tang Yuyu and said in a low voice, "Miss Tang, I've already prepared a set of clothes for you. You should go in and take a bath." Tang Yuyu looked at his drenched clothes and did not refuse. She took his clothes and went to the bathroom to take a bath. Her mind was still thinking about the scene she saw in the living room. Her cute daughter was actually able to fall asleep peacefully in the man's arms. She was truly very jealous, and also very unsavory. C-44. Calling him childish. Her daughter had always depended on her since she was young. When she slept, as long as she hugged her and leaned against her little face, she would be able to sleep peacefully. However, let me hold him for a while. The man's gaze rose as he stared at Tang Yuyu with his oppressive sharp eyes. Tang Yuyu's instinctive movements froze. This man's eyes were so scary. But why should she be afraid of him? His daughter had originally belonged to her alone. Now that he was unwilling to let her go, how could he dare to threaten her with his eyes? No, I have to take them home. Tang Yuyu immediately took out his chi and fought with him. The man's voice was still low, as if he was afraid to wake the little thing in his arms. However, his voice was filled with mockery and mockery. You want to bring my 2 children to meet your old lover? He emphasized that the child was his. Tang Yuyu was startled. How did this bastard know that she was going to see her lover? Had he overheard his phone call? Or perhaps, his thoughts were just that terrifying, to be able to see through people's hearts? It's none of your business. Tang Yuyu became even angrier, and her voice could not help but increase. She wasn't afraid of waking up her daughter. Anyway, she was going to take them home. When the man saw that she seemed to be doing it on purpose, his gaze turned cold. I definitely won't let my child recognize another man as a father. When Tang Yuyu heard his ridiculous words, she was so angry that she was about to laugh. With one hand on her waist, she looked at the man with disdain. You're not young. Why are you still so childish? I brought up the child by myself. I can do whatever I want. It's none of your business. She was purposely trying to anger this man, who told him to be so unreasonable as to snatch away Yuking. This was the first time Jig Xiao Han heard someone scolding him for being childish. This was simply the biggest humiliation to his self-esteem. Do you believe that I'll get someone to chase you out now? The man warned her coldly. That pair of terrifying eyes were filled with a dangerous factor. When Tang Yuyu, who was acting arrogantly earlier, heard that he wanted to violently deal with her, she instantly shut her small mouth. However, her eyes were filled with intense dissatisfaction and protest against him. Where is my son? I'm going to find him. Since Tang Yuyu was unable to snatch his daughter back, he could only look for his son. Her son was her little man, and he must have helped her. You go look for the Uncle Yuan, and he'll take you there. Jig Xiao Han wore a stern face, and was extremely dissatisfied with Tang Yuyu. Tang Yuyu looked at her sleeping daughter in his arms with a face full of reluctance, and angrily said, when my daughter wakes up, she will definitely come look for me. We'll see. Jig Xiao Han frowned. Where did this woman get her confidence from? His daughter was his, and he would certainly coax her well. He didn't need her. C-45. Tang Yuyu found Uncle Yuan outside the door. The Uncle Yuan came in and asked for Jig Xiao Han, and then he brought Tang Yuyu to look for Tang Xiaorui. When she sat in the Uncle Yuan's tourist carriage and traveled through the huge garden, she finally understood what it meant to be rich. S assistant, Lu King, was also working hard to accompany him, to the point of turning into his son's assistant, helping him to build a huge toy control car. Lu King felt a little awkward, but he could understand why Tang Yuyu would feel dejected and frustrated. As a mother, she could only helplessly watch as her 2 children threw themselves into the arms of her father. Most importantly, young master was an absolutely powerful person. He could feel that young master was determined to win against the 2 children. Little Rui, your fighting ability is getting better and better. Let's go home first. Mummy will buy you a new toy, a bigger one, okay? Tang Yuyu immediately squatted down, took out a tissue from his bag, and helped his son wipe off the sweat on his forehead, as he coaxed him gently. Mummy, are we going home? Are you having a good chat with Dad? Tang Xiaorui asked obediently. Xiaorui, let Mummy tell you this. I don't like that man, so he won't be your father. Only Tang Yuyu dared to speak like that because her son was a mature child, and was able to understand the displeasure in her words. If it was her daughter, Tang Yuyu was afraid that it would hurt her daughter, so she would not say such words. Tang Xiaorui blinked his gem-like eyes as if he could understand Mummy's words, but could not completely. Mummy, is he really not our father's land? The light in little rascal's eyes suddenly dimmed. Lu King, who was at the side, saw the opportunity and said, little young master, young master is definitely your father's land. The DNA report has already been released. It proves that you are young master's biological sons and daughters. Shut up. Tang Yuyu was already annoyed to the core. She did not expect that Jixiao Han's assistant would actually help a tyrant on the side. How could she not be angry? Tang Xiaorui had never seen his mother so frustrated and at a loss. Lu King could only shut his mouth obediently. From the looks of it, the temper of the child's mother was not that easy to mess with. Xiaorui, you heard from Mummy that Mummy is taking you and your sister home right now. Can you go back with him? Tang Yu crouched down and looked her son in the eye. She was truly helpless. The feeling of losing a child was something that no one else could understand. Fear and despair, yet it was also filled with sorrow and pain. If he could, Tang Yu really wanted to hide outside the country for the rest of his life. But now it was too late. Mummy, are you crying? Tang Xiaorui asked with a pained heart. Tang Yu touched her cheeks with her hand and discovered that, unknowingly, her face had long been covered with tears. She quickly stood up, turned around, covered her lips, and quickly walked out the great door. It took him great effort to conceal his emotions. However, when he looked into his son's clear eyes, he collapsed once more. Tang Yu powerlessly grabbed the side of the door with one hand as he tried to calm his heart. However, tears still continued to fall uncontrollably. It was too unfair. Mummy, don't cry anymore, all right? If you cry, I want to cry too. Tang Xiaorui ran out in hot pursuit of Mummy, his small hands pulling at the corner of his clothes, carefully trying to persuade him. As long as you and little sister follow Mummy home, Mummy will not cry. This was the first time Tang Yu had lost his composure like this in front of his son. In the past, no matter how wronged she was, as long as she saw these two cute faces, she would always feel that this world was still warm and sunny. But now, for some reason, her emotions had become so fragile and sensitive that, when she wasn't careful, tears would fall. All right, Mummy, don't cry. Let's go find our little sister and bring her home. Tang Xiaorui replied obediently. Hearing her son's considerate words, Tang Yu felt a little better in her heart. She wiped the tears off her face with a tissue, squatted down, and hugged her son tightly. Tang Xiaorui also reached out her short hands and wrapped them around Mummy's neck, pressing his face against her shoulder. Mother and child seemed to have reached an agreement. All of a sudden, sigh, little young master. Seeing the little young master being carried away by Tang Yu, Lu King was shocked. Could the young master be blaming him? It was a pity that the mother and son duo had already reached a consensus on this matter, and they simply viewed him as useless. At this moment, within a spacious living room in a villa by the ocean, Jixiao Han was currently staring at the little fellow who was sleeping soundly in his embrace. Her face was small, but it was extremely delicate and beautiful. It was truly a wonder that such a small person like her had such a heaven-defying thick and curly eyelash. With her eyes closed, her small face was incredibly beautiful. Jixiao Han couldn't help but slow down his breathing. This was his daughter. He lived to the age of 27 and his children were all gone. It was as if the heavens had bestowed upon him such a precious gift. It was difficult to explain his current mood. It was as if no words could explain the feeling of wanting to fly. Satisfied? Yes, he was too satisfied. Jixiao Han's thin lips curled upwards as he laughed to the point where he himself didn't even know how foolish he was. If people knew that the CEO Ji, who was known for his aloof attitude, had suddenly become a wet nurse, would they be shocked? But at that moment, Jixiao Han was really not afraid of losing control of himself. He could not control his excitement. "Xiao Nei, my daughter?" Jixiao Han called out to the little fellow in her arms softly, and her thin lips reluctantly kissed her little forehead again and again, as if no matter what, it was not close enough. Of course, at this moment, he seemed to have forgotten that he still had a little son to scam. In the future, only the heavens knew how miserably he would be scammed. C46. It was unknown if it was because Jixiao Han kissed her too often, but the little guy was unhappy. Feeling that a mosquito was biting her, he reached out his little hand uncomfortably, scratched his forehead, and then flapped his little mouth twice, looking like he was about to cry. Her small actions startled Jixiao Han. He thought that the position he was holding her in wasn't right, and that she wasn't well enough to sleep with the little guy. Like a butterfly flapping its wings, those long eyelashes flapped twice, and a pair of crystal black beautiful eyes opened. Jixiao Han was stunned. It can't be. What the woman said was true. Her daughter was awake and she was trying to get her. Not Dad. Xiao Nei, can I take you to see Mummy now? Don't cry. This was the first time Xiao Han had ever heard the little guy cry so easily. It was a second later, and once that largest teardrop fell, even Xiao Han's hard and cold heart was about to break as well. Without a second word, he carried his daughter and prepared to walk outside. Just at this time, Uncle Yuan drove his car and brought Tang Yuyu and Tang Xiaorui down. The four of them bumped into each other at the entrance. Mummy. The moment Tang Xiaonei saw Mummy, she immediately broke free from Xiao Han's embrace. Although Xiao Han didn't want to let go of his daughter's little strength made it impossible for him to persevere, and he could only let go of the little guy. She immediately ran towards Tang Yuyu like a puppy seeing its mother. Tang Yuyu crouched down and hugged the little fellow. Tang Xiaonei, who was still unconscious, as soon as she returned to the mummy's embrace, once again laid on the mummy's shoulder in a listless manner. She intended to continue sleeping. Xiao Han saw that Tang Yuyu was carrying one of them, and was holding it by the hand. Suddenly, this feeling of loneliness enveloped him, causing his mood to turn dry and gloomy. Daddy, we are going back with Mummy. Come find us after you have thought it through. Tang Xiaorui's cunning big eyes looked at Xiao Han with a smile. Xiao Han shrugged his shoulders. What are you thinking about? You understand. The little guy gave him a mysterious wink. Xiao Han looked at the mischievous little ghost, and suddenly felt that the rest of his life was not too bright. Of course, he understood what his son meant. He was just asking him to sign another guarantee with him. Little guy, when your little butt blossoms from a beating, you actually plotted against your father. In front of Xiao Han, she could not be proud anymore. Although he was holding onto the two little fellows with his hands, she still felt that it was not safe enough. He had to quickly leave this place, leave his territory, or else his nerves would not be this tight. I'm worried about you taking the child away like this. Coincidentally, I have something that I need to take care of. Where are you staying? I'll send you off along the way. Of course, Xiao Han wasn't willing to part with his children like this. He immediately condescended and wanted to be the driver. Tang Yuyu really did not want to stay for another second. She coldly said, you just need to ask Uncle Yuan to send us out. I won't bother you. He had followed Xiao Han for so many years, so he had long known what temper the young master had. At this moment, the murderous look in his eyes caused him to shiver. My stomach. Sorry, I suddenly have a stomachache. I need to go to the washroom. Uncle Yuan's talent in acting was not bad, just that it wronged an old man who was close to 50 years old. In order to create a good opportunity for the young master to be attentive to him, his illustrious reputation had come to an end. Xiao Han was actually very grateful to Uncle Yuan for his ability to adapt on the spot, and looked at Tang Yuyu provocatively. Tang Yuyu was so angry that her face turned completely white. This bastard was too despicable. Tang Xiaorui stood at the side. His eyes, however, were bright and astute as he suddenly sighed. Dad, are you tired? If you want to send us back to Mummy, then just speak properly. The little guy was not afraid of losing face and immediately exposed everything. Xiao Han's handsome face immediately flushed red. After hearing his son speak so arrogantly, Tang Yuyu immediately returned the gaze that he had just given him, filled with provocation, and said, that's right. Who are you putting on an act for? It's not like I'm not giving you a chance as long as you tell me properly. The blue veins on the man's forehead began to bulge sinisterly. Very good, this woman is courting death. Anyway, the Uncle Yuan cannot send you out, I can only send you out. This was the first time Xiao Han felt embarrassed. He grabbed his car key and walked towards the car. Mummy, let's get on the carriage. Tang Xiaorui smiled and held onto Mummy's hand. Although Tang Xiaorui did not give him face, he was still very excited. After all, their family had finally reunited. Although his father's face was smelly and Mummy's face was cold, the whole family is together now. Tang Xiaonei lied in Mummy's embrace, so familiar that she couldn't help but continue sleeping. Xiao Han started up the engine. Usually, he drove very fiercely, but at this moment, taking into account the fact that he had two treasures on him, His driving movements became steady and gentle. Is this the journey of a man turning into a dad? He had gone through the day like a rocket, and now he couldn't find the freedom to do as he'd done yesterday. The car steadily drove around the mountain to the entrance of the manor. The 6 black sedans that were waiting there saw his car coming out and followed him back and forth, protecting his car in the middle. "Daddy, is someone trying to rob you? Why do you bring so many bodyguards with you every day?" Tang Xiaorui's face was covered with question marks, as he asked with a serious expression. C-47. When Tang Yu heard the little fellow's suspicions, he immediately said, "That's right, it is very dangerous, so you should avoid meeting him in the future." Jik Xiao Han didn't even have the chance to explain it to his son when he heard that woman spouting nonsense. His handsome face immediately darkened. "The reason why I have my bodyguards with me isn't because I could be in danger at any time, but to make my journey safer, understand?" "Son." With a sudden stop, the 3 bodyguards' cars behind him also followed suit, but it was too late. The 3 bodyguards' cars behind him had already stuck together. Tang Xiaoru immediately pouted and shouted unhappily, "Daddy, did you buy your driver's license as well? Why are you driving so slow?" When Tang Yu heard his son's words, he could not help but burst out laughing. Jik Xiao Han was also speechless. Does this little guy know how to speak human language? How could he possibly use money to buy his driver's license? "I'm sorry, it's father's fault. Daddy will definitely focus on driving." Jik Xiao Han was still very honest in admitting his mistake to his son. It was also because he had heard that his daughter had almost left him that he had become slow due to the lack of oxygen in his brain. "Then drive properly. Don't always think of seeing Mummy's little head was sometimes too smart and sometimes too stupid." He had already regained the sense of innocence that he was at his original age, and when he turned his head back, his eyes were staring straight at Tang Yu, causing the little guy to think that he was looking at Mummy. The smile on Tang Yu's face froze. Jik Xiao Han pursed her lips with disdain. He wanted to see that woman. What a joke. The car continued to drive forward. Tang Yu stared out the window and occasionally glanced back to see the man concentrating on driving. His mood changed. He bitterly bit his lower lip and continued to stare out the window. It was already 2 in the afternoon. Tang Xiaoru sat in the carriage, rubbing his stomach that was growling. He looked at Mummy with grievance. "Mummy, I'm hungry. Let's eat something, okay?" Only now did Tang Yu and Jik Xiao Han suddenly wake up. In order to fight for the custody of their children, they had actually forgotten to eat today. Hearing Tang Xiaoru's words, the 2 of them could not help but feel hungry. "Okay, go back. Mummy will cook noodles for you." Tang Yu immediately soothed her son's little emotions. Jik Xiao Han suddenly opened his mouth and said, "I haven't eaten too. It's good. Let's find a place to eat. The child is currently growing. Eating noodles doesn't have any nourishment." "Okay, Mummy, let father treat us to a big meal." Tang Xiaoru clapped his hands and shouted happily. Tang Yu's little face froze. She immediately scolded her son while pretending to be angry. "How did I teach you? You are not allowed to eat other people's things, don't you remember? He belongs to Dad, not to anyone else." The little guy immediately answered confidently. Jik Xiao Han saw that this woman always liked to take down his position, but in order to be able to eat with the children, he could only suppress the displeasure in his heart and patiently say, "Let's eat together. I won't do anything to you." "I don't want to eat with you." "You'd better get us home." Tang Yu really did not want to stay with him for a moment longer. "Mummy, Daddy was kind enough to invite us." Tang Xiaoru, "If you continue to make trouble without reason, Mummy will be angry." Tang Yu's stern face warned his son. Tang Xiaoru immediately shrugged his shoulders, no longer daring to plead unreasonably. Jik Xiao Han never thought that this girl would not give him face. He had already said that he would treat her to a meal, but she actually refused to honor him. In the end, under Tang Yu's incredible perseverance, Jik Xiao Han still sent the 3 of them back to her aunt's house. "Little Rui, Dad will come to take you to the new school tomorrow." Jik Xiao Han followed him out of the carriage, and after that, He squatted in front of his son and patted his head and said gently, let's talk about it tomorrow." Tang Xiaorui said with an arrogant face. Tang Yuyu held her son's small hand and quickly walked into the small district. Tang Xiaonei, who had slept all the way on Tang Yuyu's shoulder, woke up now. The moment she raised her head, she saw Jik Xiaohan. "Daddy!" she shouted in a daze. Seeing that his daughter had woken up, and even called out to him, Jik Xiaohan unconsciously took a few steps forward. "Daddy!" "Mummy, I want to play with father." This time, Tang Xiaonei woke up from his sleep and started to shout noisily when he saw that his father was still sleeping. "No, let's go home and eat." Tang Yuyu hugged her daughter tightly, her footsteps becoming faster. Jik Xiaohan looked at his daughter's pitiful appearance and wished that he could carry his daughter back. However, the woman who ate the gunpowder directly brought the two children into the elevator. "Damn it!" Jik Xiaohan couldn't help but mutter a curse. Although his mind was filled with smiling children, Jik Xiaohan had no choice but to leave. If it were any other thing, as long as he wanted to, he would never compromise. However, he had suffered a huge setback in this matter. Moreover, it was not as simple as he had thought it would be. His mood today was like riding a roller coaster, going up and down in great disorder. No, he had to bring the child back to life with him, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to concentrate on his work. C-48. He ordered 2 bodyguards to guard the entrance of the district and report back to him about the whereabouts of the children. Of course, this was also to protect the safety of the 2 little fellows. If they were to lose their lives again, wouldn't that be asking for his life? Cheng Wanlian had just taken a nap and heard the door open. She had woken up. When she came out, she saw Tang Yuyu leaning against the window as she looked out, looking extremely worried and scared. She became nervous as she asked, wondering, "What are you looking at? Is something wrong?" Tang Yuyu fell on the sofa as if she had used up all of her strength. Her eyes were filled with grievance and helplessness. "Aunt, is there anything to eat? The children and I haven't eaten yet." In front of a child, Tang Yuyu didn't want to comment on Jik Xiaohan's matters. Even if they hated him and hated him, he was still their father. Cheng Wanlian understood her thoughts and quickly turned to the kitchen to busy herself. Not long later, the steaming hot egg and eggs had left the wok. Tang Yuyu brought along the 2 little gems and ate up all the noodles in the small pot. "Little Rui, bring your little sister to the house to play." Tang Yuyu wanted to send the child away so that he could have a good chat with his aunt. However, Tang Xiaonei said in a small voice, "Mummy, I want to see a cartoon." Tang Yuyu had no choice but to turn on the television in the living room for her daughter to see. Cheng Wanlian pulled Tang Yuyu into his own room and closed the door. "Eternal rest, what happened?" "I think you don't look too good," Cheng Wanlian asked worriedly. "Aunt, that man is going to steal the child." Tang Yuyu had only just opened his mouth when tears started rolling down his face. "What?" Cheng Wanlian was also shocked. She suppressed her voice and asked, "Is he really the child's father?" Tang Yuyu wiped away her tears and choked with sobs. He compared the children's DNA. It was indeed their father. "Then what should we do? What kind of person is he? How could he steal the baby from a DNA test?" "You are the one who brought up the child. You can't give the child to him, you know. Don't give them a single one. It's a pity that the children don't have a mother around." Cheng Wanlian also had a child. She knew that her mother would never be able to face the fear of losing a child. "Aunt, that man is very rich. I'm afraid that even if we fight him, we won't be able to succeed." Tang Yuyu became even more desperate and helpless. "How rich can he be?" "No matter how rich he is, he should still be reasonable. Unless he will marry you." "He won't marry me." Tang Yuyu also never thought of marrying that kind of arrogant and disrespectful man. "He can't be married." "You can't marry her." Tang Yuyu still shook his head and sobbed. "He shouldn't be married yet." "Then he isn't married, and you don't have a boyfriend. For the sake of your child, you should consider." Tang Yuyu bit her lips, and only shook her head after a long while. "No, I won't marry him, and he won't marry me either." "Aunt, do you know who he is?" "Who is it?" "Jik Xiaohan." "What? Jik Xiaohan?" Aunt's face was full of shock. The invisible tycoon who's always been suspected of being the richest man in the world. On the way to his house today, she had checked on Jik Xiaohan with her phone, but no one was able to calculate how much property Jixiao Han possessed. Everyone could only predict that his wealth might be able to surpass the world's wealthiest person, but in the list of the wealthiest people, he had never been on the list, so no one dared to look down on this man. Oh my god! Yusu, Xiaoruya and Xiaonei, are they his children? Cheng Wanlian was truly shocked, and was unable to recover from it for a long time. The two beautiful and exquisite little fellows outside the door. No wonder their genes were so good and their IQ was so high. So it turns out they all inherited his father's genes. Aunt, do you know my difficulties now? He only wants the child. When Tang Yu thought about this, his heart ached. Cheng Wanlian patted her shoulder and consoled her, wondering, Big Aunt is also worried for you, but I don't know how to comfort you. But if Xiaoruya and Xiaonei are really Jixiao Han's children, he might really take them away. He's so rich. He wouldn't let his children suffer even the slightest bit. I won't let him do that. I'd rather have my child lead a normal life. Tang Yu became even more sad. As parents, no matter what, they always felt that they owed their children. No matter if it was in terms of spirit or material, they were afraid that he couldn't give them the best. Cheng Wanlian was sad for her as well. The two of them hugged each other as tears silently flowed down their cheeks for a good while, but they didn't know what to do next. Aunt, I'm going to see a friend tonight, so the kids need your help. After a long while, Tang Yu dried his tears and said softly. Cheng Wanlian said gently, Yulong, if you have something to do, go and busy yourself. I will take good care of the children. After playing for an entire day, Tang Xiaorui climbed onto the small bed and went to sleep. He nestled in his aunt's embrace and held onto a bottle of milk, happily watching her cartoon. Tang Yu left at around 5 in the afternoon. She came to the agreed restaurant with Lu Xiu Aunt Chen. This was a very high-class Western restaurant, with luxurious facades, bright crystal lights. Tang Yu had never stepped into such a luxurious place, and was slightly surprised. She remembered that although Lu Xiu Aunt Chen's family had a little money, they weren't so rich that they could casually enter this kind of high-class place, right? Tang Yu silently estimated that for a meal like this, it would probably cost at least tens of thousands. Why did Lu Xiu Aunt Chen act so magnanimously the moment they met? Tang Yu was taken to the reserved seat by the waiter and sat down. It was actually a window seat. Her vision was very good, and she could see half the city's lights. Tang Yu picked up the cup and drank the water, patiently waiting. C49. Less than 10 minutes after Tang Yu arrived at the Western restaurant, several cars worth millions protected a luxurious long car and stopped in front of the entrance of the restaurant. The guard respectfully opened the car door and stepped off a pair of long and proud man's legs. Soon after, a young and handsome face was reflected in the bright light. This kind of man, no matter where he appeared, was definitely the most dazzling existence. He wanted to see who the other party was. It couldn't be that this woman had taken a fancy to the other party's money, right? But, in terms of money, who did he lose? Tang Yu was already drinking her third cup of water, and looking at the time again, she realized that it was almost 6:30. Why wasn't Lu Xiu Aunt Chen here yet? She had to go back early, bathe the children, and put them to bed. Just as Tang Yu was starting to get anxious, she saw two people from afar. One was Lu Xiu Aunt Chen, and the other person was actually Tang Zru. Tang Yu's face changed, her eyebrows knitted together. Why would Lu Xiu Aunt Chen appear together with him? Could it be that he would have to eat with Tang Zru tonight? Just thinking about this woman's previous performance and her arrogant tone, Tang Yu wanted to leave immediately. Wondering when the two of them walked over, Lu Xiu Aunt Chen walked over to greet her with a happy expression. When Tang Yu saw the seniors that he had once secretly fallen in love with, no matter how much he hated Tang Zru, he still revealed a slight smile. Heng Qingj, how did you get here with her? Tang Yu did not hide his disgust towards Tang Zru. Tang Zru started to act again. However, like a big miss, she threw her handbag into Lu Xiu Aunt Chen's hands. Xiu Aunt Chen, help me put my bag down. Lu Xiu Aunt Chen immediately took the bag and lightly placed it on the side. He turned around and explained to Tang Yu, wondering, you still don't know, right? I'm now Xru's manager." "What?" Tang Yu had a face full of disbelief. Lu Xuanchen was very handsome, with a gentle appearance. However, when he smiled, he was still very lethal towards girls. He lived next to Tang Xru's grandma, and the two could be considered to have grown up together. Lu Xuanchen had been very popular with the opposite sex since childhood, and her grades were good, her character was good, and she was very good-looking as well. However, what made her feel at a loss was that Lu Xuanchen was actually together with Tang Xru, which made her unable to accept it. Tang Xru had clearly done it on purpose. Seeing the thick sense of loss and frustration on Tang Yu's face, her charming lips rose upwards. Wondering, Xuanchen is truly thoughtful and considerate, and he treats me 100% good. To be able to invite him to be my manager, I'm truly too happy. Tang Xru's voice was soft and pleasant to listen to, and what she said was full of praise for Lu Xuanchen. When Lu Xuanchen heard it, he was very pleased. With a trace of shyness on his handsome face, he said, "Xru, you're too kind. It's my honor to work for you." Tang Yu looked at Lu Xuanchen's bashful smile. In his memory, he also smiled like that. "Hang Qingj, let's meet again another day. I still have things to do." Tang Yu suddenly wanted to find an excuse to leave. Wondering. Suddenly, she wanted to hold on to her bag, but was grabbed by Lu Xuanchen anxiously. Lu Xuanchen also seemed to be unwilling to part with her so quickly, and pleaded in a low voice, "Su, you can leave after eating, you've all come anyway." Tang Xru ruffled the long hair by her ear and said with a hint of ridicule, "She doesn't want to eat at my table. Xuanchen, you decide whether you want to eat with me or with her." Tang Yu suddenly understood what Tang Xru meant. Was she here to earn her favor? Indeed, Tang Xru's words had made it difficult for him. Tang Yu didn't want to make things difficult for him, so he immediately sat back down on the chair and said indifferently, "Since you're here, then I'll leave after eating this meal." Tang Xru originally thought that Tang Yu would be angered to the point that she wanted to leave, but she had never thought that her skin would become so thick. Only then did Lu Xuanchen let go of Tang Yu's wrist, and happily invited the waiter to come over and order. In a private room on the second floor, a man was standing with his hands behind his back in front of a French window. Everything that had just happened at the table near the window had caught his cold gaze. The moment Lu Xuanchen grabbed onto Tang Yu's small hand in anxiety, the man's gaze became stern and fierce. This woman really knew how to attract bees and butterflies. In such a short time, she had angered that man, even pulling his small hand. The three of them sat in front of the table. The atmosphere was very depressing. Lu Xuanchen also felt that something was wrong, but one was his boss, and the other was his friend that he had to be good friends with. Wondering, 5 years ago, you left without saying goodbye. You've really disappointed me. Lu Xuanchen took a sip of the red wine, suddenly thinking of the sad things that happened in the past, and a look of complaint appeared in his eyes. Tang Yu was also extremely sorry, and said in a low voice, "Hang Qingj, I am sorry, I just happened all of a sudden." "Hey." Something suddenly happened. Tang Xru, who was acting like a peacock the entire time, looked at her new fingernails and let out a cold laugh. Tang Yu glared over with resentment. This woman actually had the face to laugh at her. Back then, if it wasn't for her and her vicious mother framing him, would she need to flee to the outside world in a panic? What happened? Can't even tell me? I also sent people to find some news about you abroad, but you seem to have disappeared into thin air. I only called you because I heard from Xru that you came back. Lu Xuanchen had an expression of being wronged. Tang Yu frowned and asked, "Where did you find my phone number?" "I asked your grandmother." It was only then that Tang Yu understood. After returning to their country, she had called her grandmother, but she did not expect Lu Xuanchen to ask her grandmother. Could it be that after so many years, his feelings for her still had not changed? Tang Xru let out another mocking laugh. "Why didn't you tell Xuanchen what exactly happened 5 years ago? Do you not dare to say it, or do you not have the face to say it?" C50. Tang Yu was so angry that her face turned red. Of course she had no face to say it. She was knocked out and sent to the hotel by her stepmother, and her innocence was even destroyed by a shameless bastard. Tang Zhu's provocations made Lu Xuanchen even more curious about what exactly happened to Tang Yuyu 5 years ago. Han Qingzhi, I'm begging you. Don't ask anymore. Let's eat properly. Tang Yuyu still wanted to keep a blissful feeling in her friend's heart, so she was unwilling to say it. Han Qingzhi, I'm very happy to see you again. I can't eat any more for today's meal, so I'll be leaving first. Tang Yuyu was extremely embarrassed and angry. Unexpectedly, just as she stood up, a man in a suit walked over to her. She knew that man. He was Jixiao Han's assistant, Lu King. My young master would like to invite you to have a drink upstairs. Lu King politely smiled and asked. Tang Zhu naturally recognized Lu King. Upon hearing his words, Tang Zhu's beautiful face instantly turned pale white. Sorry, I'm not in the mood. Tang Yuyu replied with an ice-cold face, completely disrespecting the other party. Miss, to tell you the truth, my young master has set his eyes on you and has to invite you up. As if he knew that Tang Yuyu was not going to agree, he could only tell her the truth, without changing a single word. You have your eyes on me? What did you see in me? Tang Yuyu was so angry that he started laughing. There must be something wrong with Jixiao Han's head. Why would he coincidentally appear here again? If Miss is curious, you can go up and personally hear what my young master has to say. Lu King smiled with even more sincerity. Tang Zhu had already anxiously stood up from her seat, ignoring the sorry state of her face that had been washed by the water. She walked over quickly with a smile. So it's Assistant Lu, what a coincidence, is quarterly upstairs. I'll go say hello to him. My apologies, Miss Tang. My young master does not wish to see you right now. Lu King's face darkened, and said with absolute certainty. Tang Zhu had a look of disbelief on her face. Assistant Lu, look more clearly. I am Tang Zhu. How could your young master not see me? When Tang Yuyu heard that Tang Zhu was about to rush up to see Jixiao Han, her heart was moved, and immediately, she said to Lu King, didn't your young master set his eyes on me? Then I'll follow you up to see what the situation is. Please. Lu King immediately became happy. When Tang Zhu heard that Tang Yuyu was going to go up to see Jixiao Han, her entire body froze. No, they definitely could not let Tang Yuyu and Jixiao Han meet. If by any chance they recognized each other, wouldn't she be abandoned by Jixiao Han? Tang Yuyu, stop! Tang Zhu suddenly shouted, and then, she quickly walked in front of her. Didn't you want your mother's thing? Now come back with me to get it. Tang Yuyu was startled when she heard her. If you don't come home now to get it, I won't give it back to you for the rest of my life. Tang Zhu was truly afraid, which was why she said such truthless words. Tang Yuyu bit her lips and said coldly, all right, I will go with you to get it. This time, you better not lie to me. Of course I won't lie to you. Let's go. As Tang Zhu said this, she actually reached out and grabbed Tang Yuyu's arm, as if he was afraid that she would turn around and go upstairs to see Jixiao Han again. Lu King did not think that Tang Yuyu would actually not meet with the young master, and instead go to get something, and immediately became anxious. Miss, my young master is still waiting for you upstairs. Let him wait. He really takes himself seriously. Tang Yuyu said angrily. When Tang Zhu heard Tang Yuyu's rude and impudent words, the corner of her mouth raised up proudly. Tang Yuyu, with your straightforward temper, you will miss out on a great opportunity sooner or later. If Jixiao Han heard her words, he would probably never want to see her again in his life. Lu King shrugged his shoulders helplessly. It looks like, in this world, only Tang Yuyu dared to ignore his family's young master. Lu Xuanchen looked dumbstruck, looked at Lu King's figure, and then looked at the direction in which Tang Zhu had pulled Tang Yuyu and quickly left. Only then did he realize that Tang Zhu had left in a rush, and had not taken out his handbag yet. He picked it up and quickly chased after her. Tang Yuyu was grabbing onto Tang Yuyu's hand, but she used her brute force and grabbed onto her hand painfully, causing her to angrily shake it off. Tang Zhu looked at Tang Yuyu's back with hatred and panic, gritting her teeth in hatred. In order to make sure that Tang Yuyu would not go back and see Jixiao Han again, she could only quickly follow her down the stairs. Reaching the first floor's hall, suddenly, many of Tang Zhu's fans surrounded him. all of them excitedly wanting Tang Xuru's photo and signature. Tang Xuru was startled by the sudden appearance of a group of fans. Only then did she remember that her hat and sunglasses were in her bag, and she forgot to take off her bag. Seeing that so many people were patting her on their phone, she suddenly came to a realization and pulled Tang Yuyu over to her side. She smiled at a group of her fans. Everyone stop filming, even celebrities are people. I just wanted to have a meal with my sister today. Please forgive me. Tang Xuru's gentle tone, when heard by the fans' ears, made them feel like she was the incarnation of the goddess of perfection. Her every move was filled with the aura of a celebrity. Tang Yuyu never thought that Tang Xuru would act so well, even pulling her along to act with him.